discussing a very short video about the various type specimens in paleontology. I have noticed that over the last few years, at least one question is asked every year in the GSI prelims examination. Yes, of course, few other competitive exams. But this question has become a regular feature of the GSI preliminary examination. So let us understand what are the various type specimens used in the paleontology. Here I will be explaining only the definitions in simplified language, but I won't be giving you any examples for it so that you may not get confused. I would request and recommend all of you to read some good books of paleontology. Say, for example, the Paleontology written by Robb and Stanley. It's quite an old book, but it's a wonderful book. Other than that, you can find several examples on internet so that you can find out as per your convenience. So let us begin. Just to go through the introduction, we all know that the uh, living as well as the fossilized organisms, they are given a common name as well as a scientific name. The scientific name has been uh, described by the taxonomist, and that particular way of naming scientifically is called as the binomial nomenclature. So, not going into much details, but we know that there are various units of classification starting from taxon, then phylum, class, order, genus, and species. So, in binomial nomenclature, we normally use two words. The first one designating the genus or genera, and the second one, the species. So, the various species which have been described by the taxonomist, they are based on some or the other type specimen. Because once we find a fossil, who has told us, or how do we know that this fossil is not a rock piece, not a clast, but rather it is some remnant of an old pre-existing animal or a plant? To understand that, we always need to compare the discovered artifacts with the modern day forms. So, under such circumstances, it is always very important to identify a specimen which best defines the characters of that particular species. That is what is called as the type specimen. So, the species have been described by the taxonomists on the basis of a type specimen. Okay, and once the type specimen is designated, then it is studied in detail, and the details are then published in a scientifically recognized publication, which is ratified by the International Commission on Nomenclature. So, those who are aware, they must be knowing that the International Commission on Nomenclature consists of the ICZN and ICBN, zoological nomenclature and botanical. So, it is important for assigning the binomial nomenclature. Then the published scientific name and the official description, which defines the characteristic of the species, are then permanently associated with this type species. So once an author or a scientist or a geologist or a paleontologist uh, designates a type specimen and defines the morphological characteristics of that particular taxon or species using that type specimen, then the descriptions will never be changed. So, those who are into paleontology, they are reading and studying paleontology, they must have seen that there are the names of authors are written after the name of the species is given. Say, for example, I'll give you an example of uh, microfossil Globigerina bouloides, and then if you'll see the literature, it is written Globigerina bouloides D. Orbigny 1839. So, what does this mean? D. Orbigny, Euclid D. Orbigny was the scientist or the author of this particular species Globigerina bouloides, and he discovered it in the year 1839, of course on the basis of some specimen which he found. So that particular specimen which was used in 1839 for the description of this species by D. Orbigny will be called as the type specimen. So now even if there are changes in the description of the morphological characteristic features of that species, still that original type specimen will be described as per the original description by the. So, what is a type? So, a type is a particular specimen or specimens. So, it could be single specimen, it could be a series of specimens of an organism to which the scientific name of that organism is formally associated. So, whenever a scientific name is given, it has to be given on the basis of certain morphological features, so that when we are comparing two different taxon or maybe specimens of the same taxon, then we have a reference point. Now, over the last century, and a lot of studies have been done, and the selection of type specimen has always presented several problems. I mean, it is really not easy to decide which particular specimen will best describe a species or a taxon. Okay, so it's not really easy, and therefore with time, there have been several designations of specimens to describe the same species, but over the years, people have found out a better specimen which kind of describes the that particular species in a much better way. Earlier, once the type specimens were the concept was evolving, then type specimens were widely used to define species and had special standards for comparison of several taxa. But as the taxonomic studies progressed, now it is known that many of the type specimens are not the most precise representative of their species. Yes, this is very, very true. That once we have a certain uh, group of organisms. So, for example, we have a Productus, which is a brachiopods. Now, we all know that there are several species of Productus, and it is not possible that one fossil specimen will best describe all the characteristics of Productus or that species. So, people have now moved ahead from the concept of type specimen, and then they have been consistently looking for the specimens which describe a particular taxon in a much better way. So there can be a range of variations in the morphological characteristic of a species which warrants the discovery and use of new type specimens. So in the modern paleontology, the type specimen means that which was that single specimen which was discovered for the first time for description of a species is more or less no longer used for the definition. Rather, it has become the name bearer. Say, for example, if a particular species name, let us say Globigerina boulardis, there's a very common foraminifera, planctic foraminifera, which we all have heard of. So, if Globigerina boulardis, uh, new specimens are discovered which better describe all the features of this particular taxon, then they are not the original type specimen, but the name Globigerina boulardis will be kept because it was given originally when this species was defined. So, there are various kinds of type specimens: holotype, syntype, paratype, lectotype, neotype, plesiotype, and topotype. This is not hard and fast rule. There can be allotype, there can be co-type. So, but these are normally the formal type specimens. You can designate your own type specimen, but you need to properly define them. Uh, when we study paleontology, it becomes very, very important to understand which specimen, the specimen that we are using for the description, which type of specimen is that. So, for example, if in our practical classes we are using invertebrate fossil samples, we immediately cannot say that we are using a holotype because that is not the correct definition, or we cannot call it as a syntype or paratype. We are simply using a sample, but and it is quite possible that particular sample shows you all the features of that particular taxon or species, but still you cannot call it a holotype or a paratype. That needs to be properly defined. So let us look one by one what all these type specimens are. So holotype, remember, it is the original specimen. So, if a single specimen is designated to describe a taxon or a species by the original author, means when it was discovered for the first time, only that particular single specimen will be called as the holotype. And therefore, it will always be one single specimen, and it can be designated only once. Years may come and go, centuries may pass, but if a holotype is originally designated and published, it can never be changed. No subsequent specimen will ever be called as a. In future, you may find a specimen which is better than the holotype, but still that new specimen will not be called as a holotype, and no subsequent author can ever designate a holotype. So the description of the designation of holotype will always be credited to the original author of that species. As I have explained previously about the type specimen, now the uh, holotype is not normally used for the description of and definition of a particular species. Rather, it is now more or less a name bearer. So I hope you understood holotype. Now, sometimes it may happen that while the author was describing or defining a species, he did not find a single specimen which best showed the characters. Rather, that purpose was served by several specimens or a series of specimens. So, if more than one specimens are used to describe a taxon or a species originally, when the holotype is not designated by the original author, it will be called as the syntype. And remember, you may have several specimens in a syntype. Therefore, a syntype is called as a series of syntypes. And there, no two specimens are considered superior or inferior. They all are of equal rank, and therefore, each specimen will be called a syntype. Always remember that syntype can never be single specimen. It has to be more than one. And again, a syntype can be designated only once, means at the time of original description or the first time. So you may define syntype when you are not getting one good specimen which you can call as a holotype. So syntypes can always will have to be always more than one and can be designated only once. No subsequent specimen will ever be called a syntype other than the original one, and also no subsequent author can ever designate a syntype. It will always be credited to the original author. One thing you should remember, that once a series of syntypes are designated and later somebody finds out that a particular specimen is one of the best specimen describing the morphological characters, still that cannot be made a holotype. So when syntypes are designated, holotype cannot be assigned from that series. So holotype has to be single, designated by the original author. But if in case holotype is not designated, then the original author can designate a series of syntypes. Moving ahead, now we come to the paratype. The paratype is the specimen which is other than holotype, formally designated by the original author of a species. So, for example, the a particular author described a species using a holotype. Later, he found a series of specimens which are also best suited to describe that particular taxon or species. So in that case, the original author only will choose a single specimen, or it may be a series of specimens, but which will not be holotype. So that you should remember that a paratype can be a single specimen or can be multiple specimens. but it has to be other than the holotype. Holotype can never be included in a paratype. It can be designated only by the original author, and here uh, uh, a liberty is given that if an author has originally designated syntype, a series of syntypes, from that series of syntypes, the original author has the liberty to choose the best specimens and name them as paratype. No subsequent author can ever designate a paratype other than the original author. So it can be possible that a paratype is designated, later than the description or designation of a holotype or syntype, but it has to be done by the original author. No new author can designate a paratype. So the designation of paratype is advantageous for taxonomic description. Why? Because the holotype will help you to give the name, while there can be more than one paratypes which may explain the morphological concept of that particular taxon or species in a much better way. So the paratype is kind of a better type specimen for description of a species, but remember it has to be given by the original author. Next is a lectotype. Here you have to understand that lectotype is a specimen originally described as the syntype by the author of the species, the original author, but later singled out by any subsequent author as a definitive type specimen of the taxon species. For example, somebody uh, finds, a series of syntype, and he that particular author originally described that species based on those series of syntypes. Few years later, another person, another author, he found out from that syntype, from that whole bunch of syntype, he found one best specimen which may describe the species or the taxon in a much better way. Then that will be called as a lectotype. So a lectotype has to be a single specimen which should match the original description of a species which was given by the original author. You will find in scientific literature there have been many debates about the designation of lectotype by new authors, but some other contemporaneous authors may not agree, because it might be possible that the uh, lectotype did not match the original description of the taxon. So lectotype cannot be designated by the original author. It's very, very important. Lectotype has to be designated by some other author, and it can be chosen from a series of syntypes. Now, what is the purpose to designate a lectotype? I mean, there is a holotype, syntype, paratype, but why lectotype? So imagine that an author was describing a species, defining a species, and that author designated a holotype as well as set of paratypes or syntypes. But that particular author was not aware of many modern or progressive taxonomic concepts. So had he been knowing about those new features or new concepts of taxonomy, he would have chosen a better specimen. So once we have a holotype, syntypes, and paratypes, if a new author adds one lectotype to that whole group, then it is better that now we have one more type specimen which will add information to the description of that species. That is why the lectotype, it kinds of duplicates the original author's thoughts. If that author was aware of more advanced concepts of taxonomy at his time, he would have chosen a much better specimen. So a new author assists the original description of the species by adding another type specimen, that is called as the lectotype. This is very, very important. So in the especially in the micropaleontology domain, several lectotypes are designated by many authors. Many are in many accept those lectotypes, while while others question them because it has to match with the original description. And even subtle and slight differences in the morphological changes in morphological features may lead to the rejection of a certain lecture. Please always remember that taxonomy is very, very variable, and it's kind of very, very qualitative. So it is quite possible that two workers may not agree on the same feature of the same species. It has to be very, very subjective and qualitative. So the lectotype helps in such a case. Then we come to the neotype. If a certain type specimen is lost or destroyed, because all the type specimens need to be lodged in some particular repository. It could be a museum, it could be the office of a commission, or it could be some particular lab. So suppose that the holotype of a certain species is lost somewhere in Europe, and in that lab fire breaks out. So what will happen? That type specimen will either be lost or destroyed. So once the type specimen is lost, then a new type specimen is designated to replace the lost ones. So that is called as a neotype. Neo means new. So neotype is a specimen which is designated to replace the lost or destroyed type specimens, and it can be designated by the original author or by any subsequent. So there is this liberty. Then comes plesiotype. Now, what is plesiotype? This word plesiotype has been used to define very similar looking specimens. So, what is the formal definition? The specimens designated to redefine or re-illustrate a taxon or species if the original definition has changed. So, let us suppose that a particular species was defined in certain year in 1850, and with time and uh, development of new concepts, the description of that species has changed. So, under such circumstances, the holotype, the paratype, and the syntype will not serve the purpose to describe that particular species whose original definition has changed. Therefore, you need to have a new type specimen which will be called as plesiotype, and then again it cannot be designated by the original author. It has to be done by the subsequent author who has redefined the taxon of the species. So plesiotype cannot be the holotype, nor it can be chosen from paratype and syntype. Again, in this case also, let us say that the description of that species has changed, but the news worker chooses to keep the old name. So again, the old name will be given only on the after the follow, because it will be the name there. So that is called as a plesiotype. And what is topotype? Sometimes uh, a type specimen is discovered from a locality. That locality is called as type locality. So once a geologist goes to the field, geologist recovers some rock or sediment material and then processes it and then finds out a type specimen. But that particular author or a new author may revisit the field of the type locality, and then finds and then collects the material from the same locality, but it has to be different from the original material. So a specimen that is not the part of original type material but has been collected from the type locality. So uh, uh, the original author or the subsequent author may collect the samples from some other outcrop in the same type locality, then it is called as the topotype. So it may be designated by the original author as well as any subsequent author, and it has to be done on a date later than the discovery of holotype. So you cannot designate a topotype on the same date as you are designating the holotype, and it cannot also be done from the same material, because if you'll recover a specimen from the same material from which holotype has been discovered, then it will be classified either as paratype or syntype, but it will not be a Topotype. So all these are formal type specimens defined by the International Commission on Nomenclature, and uh, now these have become an important part of the GSI preliminary examinations. I have seen the papers. I hope you are also preparing for it, and therefore I thought it will be pertinent to just help you with the definition because people get confused. So, just to summarize, the holotype, syntype, and the paratype, they cannot be designated by author other than the original. Okay, then a lectotype, it cannot be designated by the original author. Lectotype has to be designated by a new author, while the neotype can be given by the original author or a new author. A plesiotype cannot be given by the original author, it has to be done by the subsequent author, while topotype can be given by both original author or a subsequent author. So you can prepare a few multiple choice questions based on this information. I hope you understood it well. Very soon we'll meet in another video which will help you for your examinations. Thank you so much.